Okay, so uh, we are here for the with Ben Wander, uh, game developer, and I guess I'll hand it over to you to talk a little bit about yourself and your experience in your recent project.
Sure, yeah. So I've been in game development since 2009. How long is that now? Geez, 12 years. So a pretty decent amount of time. I started at EA Mobile, which was a game development studio in Montreal. I sort of bounced around the mobile space a bit and then went into AAA console gaming at studios like Silicon Knights. And then I went to BioWare and then I went to Visceral Games. So I've worked on a bunch of different size projects with a whole range of team sizes from as small as 5 to 10 people to as large as hundreds of developers all working on the same game all at once. In 2015, I left that and started my own studio called The Wandering Ben, where I made a game called The Case of Distrust, which is a 1920s narrative mystery. And after that, I got some friends from my old job to come with me to make the next game. We started a company called The Wandering Band, building off The Wandering Ben. And we made a game called Airborne Kingdom, which is the sky city builder, where you take a city that's in the sky and fly it around and explore for resources and quests and mysteries and things like that. So that's kind of very briefly my short story of game development. I guess I teach the game development capstone at the University of Denver. So I have some experience with students and student life and kind of learning how to make games as well. That's something I'm really passionate about also.
Cool, cool. Uh, great, great. Um, I guess we'll just jump into the Q&A because I don't have a lot to add to that. Um, so how different is the space of creating your own game from working on a big company project?
It's night and day. It's very different being on a team of 300 people, with 3 years to make a project. If you give me 300 people in 3 years, there's a lot that you can do, especially when they're very skilled workers who have kind of been doing the same thing for a while, who are trained, who are experienced. The flip side of that coin is that in order to pay 300 people for 3 years, you need to sell a lot of units of your game in order to break even. I mean, if you kind of work out the math, your break even point ends up being 5 to 10 million copies. If one of my indie games sold 5 to 10 million copies, Michael, I would buy you a yacht. So the
Right.
the difference between what you can make is quite stark too, in the sense that the content of my games don't have to appeal to an enormous broad conglomerate of people. I can make something a bit more niche. I don't need it to reach such a huge audience, and I can still be successful in the space and still have fun doing what I'm doing.
Awesome, awesome. I think like I'm just gonna go kind of off the cuff
Sure.
there because you mentioned the value of experience, which is it's an interesting um, thing to think about for somebody who's looking to get into game development because I feel like we're always trying to understand how to get to a place where we can contribute enough value to a company to like to get hired but also to be useful. So could you speak to a little bit from the perspective of somebody who might be looking to hire someone just theoretically about what kind of value you would want to see somebody or just like how you're looking to get value from someone, I guess, that's coming on in an entry level.
Yeah, I think there is a difference in the types of hires that you're looking for when you have a very tiny company. So our company is, maybe 7 people. If you really stretched it out, maybe up to 10, but a lot of those people are contract based and, four of us are the owners of the company. So it's really this tiny, tiny thing. So when you're hiring for a small
Mm,
company, you're really looking at the ability to do a lot of different things. You want people who can pivot. You want an art director who also knows how to model, who also knows how to do a bit of 2D work, who can also run the UI, all of these different things. I think
yeah,
for very entry level people, working at a big company is a really easy way to get a step into a lot of those other elements. So they need people who are much, much more specialized than that. You have a separate VFX artist to your VFX animator to your tech artist to your graphics engineer to your art director. I mean, that entire stack is many people tall, and that's just one very small part of game. That's just making the particles look nice. Basically, I'm trying not to say that in an insulting way. I think it's very important. I think games, especially with a lot of like detail, require a lot of technical art and particles and stuff like that. But at a smaller studio, you don't have the luxury of having a specialized person doing that. So obviously, it ends up looking not as good, but you also need different skill sets to help fill that out. Whereas I think at a large
yeah,
company, it ends up being a little more specialized. You're more of like a gear that's helping this big machine kind of move along, you know?
yeah. One thing that I think is kind of interesting that I've found as um, I've developed my own experience with like just making things with code is that a lot of times what you end up learning through the process of making stuff is just like what doesn't work. Do you think to some extent like the value of experience is just the amount of failure that somebody has already like discovered so they're not bringing that to your project?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, and the way I sort of frame it is you gain an instinct of kind of what works and what doesn't in different contexts. That can be
Yeah,
an engineering instinct of how should we structure our data systems or how should we build the save backend, all the way to game design, where I think everybody has really good ideas for games, but when it comes down to implementing them, what those details are, what paths you go down as you're iterating. I think with experience in game design, you can just shorten a lot of those iteration loops because you've had the experience to make better decisions at different crossroads. And I think that's really where it comes down to is really understanding sort of patterns that you can recognize, and so your speed ends up increasing quite a lot.
yeah. That's um I guess it's ironic because we are here on Super Bowl Sunday that it strikes me that it's a little bit similar to like the value of veterans in sports. Like they you do develop that instinct where they kind of know what works and know what doesn't work. They can avoid some mistakes, but also contribute that mysterious value of experience. I guess that also leads me into another question that I had here. When you're first beginning a project, like how do you balance the need to plan for an outcome versus being able to see what works organically and open up some amount of experimentation, maybe uh, some surprise element that to get some elements that maybe you didn't expect.
So, game development, I think to most developers, definitely to me, is about iteration. You're looking for something fun, and fun is such a nebulous term, let alone the actual feeling that you get, that you can't be too locked into what you're doing from the very start. You want to plan as far as having a goal, as far as having a direction, but then you really want to get into prototypes and iteration and playtesting as quickly as possible, whether that's self playtesting, playtesting within your team, doing external playtests, doing massive sort of numbers based community playtesting. Those are at different times and at different scales of your project, but getting people to play the game, even if it's just you, and seeing, am I having fun with this thing, is vital. and being honest with yourself is really important. And so I think, yeah, having a plan from the beginning to give you some type of direction, to give you an idea of where you need to go is really important. But then actually getting it in software and playing it and seeing, is this thing actually fun? And then sort of iterating again, go back to the planning stage and think, why wasn't this fun? What can I do to make this a little bit different, or this, have a little less friction in these moments? And then do that loop once over, one more time. I think especially when you start a project, that's vital.
Yeah. Um, I guess I will try to like phrase this question as it's just sort of coming to my mind. How can we look at that iteration process from the perspective of the growth of, say, a newcomer into the game development world? Because I think that a lot of times when somebody's coming to game development, I could speak for myself personally. Like you want to jump in and make your own Warcraft or your own Diablo. That was my personal mistake. Like I thought I was gonna make my own Diablo or whatever, just me, myself, and like Unity uh, as one person. So like, how do you think that we should? It's I'm trying to like phrase this as a question rather than just like brain dump my own thing, but it seems similar uh, that there should be some process of iteration in terms of growing as in what we can make. Do you generally advise people to start with smaller projects when they're getting into game development for some reason similar to that?
Absolutely. I think you have to find something that will motivate you and drive you to move forward. So I wouldn't necessarily tell you to not make what you think is fun, but the scale and the scope of any project, even something tiny like a Pong clone or like an asteroids clone, takes a lot of work to do. It takes a lot of real work to even understand, hey, how do I draw this sprite on a screen and let you control it with a controller? That's not easy, especially if you haven't done it before. And so, the way I compare it, it's like something like masonry. If you want to be a mason to build a cathedral, you're not going to start by building a cathedral. You're going to start by understanding how bricklaying works, how mortar works. You're going to start by understanding different materials. You're going to build smaller things, like a well, or I don't know, an outhouse or something. I don't know what people build with brick. This is a bad analogy because I don't know that much about masonry. But you know what I mean? It's about building a skill set slowly over time. And I think a lot of people kind of jump into games without thinking about it that way. I mean, we were just talking before this call about what I'm doing now. And this weekend, for the first time, made an application that can generate noise, a type of noise called Worley noise. And, it has a preview screen, it has a button that clicks generate, it uses compute shaders, which is just a fancy term for something that runs on your graphics card. It can save out to disk, and all of these little things are just tiny snippets of something I didn't really know how to do. And I've been in the games industry for 12 years, and there's still things that I'm learning every day. And so I think coming at it with the mindset of, I'm not going to make the next Diablo, or I'm not going to make the next Halo, but I'm going to build the skill sets in myself in order to know how to make games. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to make the next Diablo, but I think in the same way, you'd have to think about, okay, if I'm a Mason, how do I make a cathedral? Well, that involves a lot of effort and a lot of time, and really a lot of building into the role of chief architect or something. In the same way, if you want to make the next Diablo, I think your goals should be aligned with, well, who's making Diablo? How can I get to lead a team that makes Diablo 7 or something? And I think looking at everything as a stepping stone to get there, but having a realistic expectation of what that means and the difficulty that that brings along with it is important.
Yeah, I like that you used the metaphor of a mason, because I often try to I went through 4 years of creative writing workshops
Hmm.
in college, so I've I have a lot of exposure to another uh, field that people have a lot of like enthusiasm for. That's something that often you have to demystify.
Yeah.
So I like analogize making games or doing web development, any type of coding, to like woodworking or some other craft, just to try to demystify it, because there's a lot of people who have this they're sort of starstruck by the idea of doing it, and so they miss or ignore the amount of work that goes into learning how to make something in particular, and also just how to develop yourself into that crafts person who is able to make those things. Let's see. Let me. So I guess go to this question. If you're looking at someone who wants to make games and is on step zero, is it more important to know where you want to end up, or to keep an open mind and experiment with creating? I think what kind of part of what I'm thinking about there is a lot of people will come into a community of aspiring coders or something, and they'll ask, like, what's the best engine or something? Should
Right.
I focus on making stuff with Unity or Unreal, or there are many other engines out there? Should you be focused on that, or just like make something? Just, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think you probably have a similar mindset with creative writing, I would imagine, where just doing it is part of the process. Like trying something, even something small, again, you're not going to start creative writing and write a 7 book medieval epic. You kind of want to start with smaller chunks that you can bite off and learn from. And that was that last question, about trying to start with skill building and smaller projects that are more realistic. But in terms of just picking an engine or picking a language, I do think that a lot of starting game developers, a lot of early game developers, spend too much time on that. I think the skills that you learn from just making a game kind of transfer to whatever engine that you want to work with. So if you're a coder and you love C++ for whatever reason, you're used to it, you use it at work, cool, use Unreal. I mean, there's a perfectly good engine that uses C++ or C Sharp and Unity. Or if you're not as comfortable with coding, there's plenty of engines that just use visual scripting, or might not need any code at all if you're doing something like an RPG maker where you can just sort of place and drag objects. It really depends on what it is that you want to do. I think modding games with mod tools is an avenue that a lot of aspiring game developers have stopped thinking about. I think that was really big in the 90s when people modded Doom and Quake and all of these different things, but has since kind of lost some of its luster, at least in the PC space. And I think bringing that back is really important, because you start with tool sets that people actually use. If somebody asks me, well, how do I work? How do I go work at Skyrim, or how do I work at Bethesda to make the next Skyrim? Well, the Skyrim tools are out there. You get them by buying the game. They're right there. They're on your computer. Make a level. Like just try it. Just do it, and then play your level and have other people play it and see what they like about it and see what they don't like, and learn more about level theory and all of these things. But step one is make a level. So I do think that making is a big part of it for sure. I think you're absolutely on the money.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I personally would say that I've definitely learned some things by like experimenting with modding a couple of games, because you get to see how they did things,
Mm-hmm.
really. Like, they you do get to peek behind the scenes, or under the cover, under the hood,
Mm-hmm.
and see how they solve problems, which is a pretty big deal, because that's, I guess, something with any craft is just not like reinventing the wheel. Like there's no need to do that if you can just see how other people did stuff. That's going to give you a huge head start to figure out how to solve your own problems.
Well, and it shows you what good looks like. Maybe you don't know the theory behind it. Maybe you don't know why they chose this branch instead of the other way to do it. But you can see that they did it. And you can sort of, we're all standing on the backs of giants, right? I mean, none of us, I did not, weld every single component of my computer that I'm talking on with you right now, right? But I know how to use it. I know how to function with it at a certain level. And I think when you get into any craft, it copying, and I think it was Ingmar Bergman that said, if I see something good, I steal it. And I think modding helps you see a lot of good things and develop a lot of good instincts, and you might not even know why, but I think it ends up seeping into your subconscious in really good ways.
Cool. Let me find another question here. All right. I guess move on a little bit in the subject area here. So I'll go back to discussing your experience a little more. Does working as an indie developer cause you to think more in terms of publishing and marketing? Can you speak to how this affects your process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're in AAA games, when you have teams of 300 people, there's a whole department called marketing that just deals with public relations and marketing and sort of ideas that make sense in the marketplace that will sell. They're really focused on what has sold previously and what can we do to leverage that again, because they need to sell 10 million copies to break even. I think it was Ryan Clark, who works at Brace Yourself Games, a Vancouver studio, or at least this is where I saw this diagram first. Basically, it's a Venn diagram of three circles. One is labeled, what game do you want to make? One is labeled, what game can you make with your own skills and the team that you have? And then the third is, what game will sell? And there is always an answer lying in the middle of there. I've never ever found that there is nothing that I can think of that I want to make, that I can make, and that will sell. There's always something in there. And so that, I guess, before needing my own indie games to sort of make money for me, that last circle is something that I would ignore. But I wouldn't say that I'm constrained by that at all. It helps narrow my focus from the beginning of, okay, what is there that I want to make, that I can make, and that will also find an audience to it.
Yeah. How important is playing games in your own experience as being a gamer to help you define that last circle of like what would sell? How your own feeling of like what would I buy? How much does that help you figure that out?
I think playing a lot of games is vital for many, many aspects of game development, especially when it comes to game design. I think for marketing, it's almost useless. It's less about what I myself would, because I'm a very specific person. I play really esoteric games because I'm a game developer. I want novelty. I want something interesting. I want something different. That's what I value, and that's not necessarily. I mean, that shouldn't be my approach to what audience a game has. And so I think a lot of finding and defining that final circle is going and doing market research, is finding, okay, what genres are underserved in games right now, which game types are selling really well, and why, and defining that why. And I think a lot of, especially young game developers or game developers with not a lot of experience, think of that as a really money driven marketing idea. But really, a lot of it is down to game design. If you can't define why a game did really well from a design perspective, then you failed. And I think that's where a lot of marketing departments in AAA fail. They go, oh, this game sold really well because it's a multiplayer shooter. No, I mean, it's a multiplayer shooter, but plenty of multiplayer shooters don't do very well. Why did this one in particular catch? You know, who did it catch with first, and how did they build up that audience, that type of thing. And again, we're talking again about genres that sell tens of millions of copies, but a similar question should be asked with whatever you're working on, a narrative fiction game, a city builder. You need to go and ask yourself these questions of why is this game successful and this other game not, and finding out that from a game design standpoint first is honestly the best way to design a game, I think.
All right. So you're doing this part of your process generally before you begin like substantial work on any game?
Yeah, absolutely. I think every human who plays video games has tons and tons of ideas for making a game, and I am never bereft of ideas. I will always share any nugget of an idea that I have with anybody else, because even if we end up making the same thing, by the time we iterate through it, it's going to be so vastly different that we're not going to even be able to recognize it. The idea isn't really the issue. It's choosing which idea to go forward with that ends up being the problem. And again, maybe I do want to make a World of Warcraft clone, but can I do that with the skills that I have with a team of 4 people? Probably not. So, you know, I make maybe a Sonic the Hedgehog clone? Well, maybe, but is that what the marketplace really wants right now? And is that really what I'm driven to make? You know, all of these questions kind of coalesce into, of the hundreds of ideas bouncing around in my head, which one makes the most sense to go forward with next.
All right. How do you feel like you know when you have that answer? And did you, so because you did this most recent game, you formed a studio with some fellow creators. So did you make that decision as a committee as well there?
Yeah, the way we work is, and I just learned this term, so I'm going to use it all the time, is a holacracy. So we make all of our decisions basically by polling everyone and seeing what everyone thinks, and we don't move forward unless we come to an agreement. So it's a very holacratic, holistic type of development environment, because really we want buy-in from everybody before we move forward. If we're a small team of 4 or 5 people and one person doesn't like what we're doing, that means a quarter of our team is not into the project, and that's not a good thing to have. So yeah, we did that. We did that as a group, and we did that again at the ideation stage of what do we want to make. We had some ideas. You know, we were talking earlier about an idea of a shopkeeper or a bartender. One of our first ideas was a bartender in a hotel, and it was like this mystery game where you played it in VR, and it was during the Second World War, and there was a lot of writing in it and all this stuff. And then we did a bit of more market research, and we went, yeah, unless you get funding for VR, it's just not going to happen. And this game idea that we had was pretty critically based on VR. Like, it was a lot of you looking around while doing stuff with your hands. So, you know, you're slipping passports to people and things like that. And without funding, it just didn't make sense for us, and that's fine. I mean, I think it's something that's good to start with, to research if it's going to work, and if it doesn't, move on. I'm not precious with any of the ideas I have, because again, there's so many ideas that you can make games off of. Moving on to the next one isn't that big of a deal.
All right. Was it did it come down to like a tournament of ideas where they're like stages, or
No, but that'd be an
was it?
interesting way to do it. You know, so there's a studio called Double Fine Productions, and they make Psychonauts was like their big game, but they make a lot of other games as well. And the way that they determine, at least for a very long time, of what their next game was, is that they had game jams. They had internal game jams in a process that they called Amnesia Fortnight, which was basically 2 weeks of forget everything else that you're doing and just make this new thing, this new game, this passion project that you have. And they would split off into tiny, tiny teams of like 4 or 5 people and all make like their own game over the course of 2 weeks. It was intense, but it was super fun. It got them all, it got more camaraderie, and it got a lot of ideas off the ground. Stacking is a game that they made that comes out of that process. Costume Quest is another one. Trenched is another one. There's a lot of ideas that they had, and really it came down to, okay, we made all these prototypes. Which of them were fun? It's really easy if you're honest with yourself and not too precious about your ideas. then it's really easy to judge what's fun and what isn't. You do it all the time when you play games at home that aren't your own. And so that honesty and that clarity is vital. And once you have that, I think it's really easy to see once you prototype what sticks and what might not.
Yeah, that just I have to say that sounds great.
Yeah, that sounds super
Uh,
fun. I'd be excited to do something like that. It's really cool.
yeah, at the very least, I feel like I wish I could be a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
That game jam event. All right, so let's see. Let me find another question here. Okay, so switching subjects here again, I'm going to go back to exploring a little bit more of your experience teaching game development. So, as someone who teaches game development, what are some of the qualities that you see in your more successful students?
Yeah, we sort of touched on this a little bit in the last question, but the biggest thing is learning how to find and accept critique and be open to the fact that maybe there are parts of your game that aren't good. And I think that's a lot harder than it sounds. You say that out loud and everybody nods in agreement and smiles and then goes home and has somebody else play their game and basically explains why it's good to the person as they're playing it. And I think that's a very damaging thing to do because you're not if you make a game, chances are 99% of the people that you play with are not going to be sitting right next to you while they're playing it, right? So having the iteability to step back and take your personal feelings out of it and really understanding how to run a playtest is really vital to the iteration of a successful game. And I think the students that I have that can run a playtest well without influencing their playtesters, without answering all of their questions. What I see with a lot of early game developers is somebody is playing their game and they go, "Oh, where do I go next?" And the developer goes, "Oh, through that red door." And then at the end of the playtest, you ask them, "Hey, were you ever confused about where you needed to go?" And they go, "Oh no, it was fine. I got through it just perfect." And then that's it. That's what you've learned. I think having the ability to watch someone play your game, and it's tense and it's terrifying, and even I to this day feel like my skin is crawling sometimes because maybe something messes up, and maybe I don't know, what the player is going to do, and they're going to break something that's going to take me months to fix with design and then iteration and prototyping, whatever. So I get it; it's stressful, and it can be something that you take very personal. But the more you can remove yourself from that, the more you can answer questions with a question, the more you can genuinely dig for and take critique to your idea, the better your game is going to be.
Yeah, I think I can speak to that a little bit from my experience in creative writing workshops. But it's a dangerous temptation to argue with your audience because ultimately, at the final stage, when people have the freedom of choice to take or leave whatever you're offering, you really can't argue with your audience,
Right.
and people either get something out of it or they don't, and they're not going to flatter your feelings if you were to get to a point where you release something or whatever. It's either people want it or they don't. So continuing on that vein of questions, are there any attitudes or behaviors that you might warn against for aspiring game developers from your experience in teaching game development?
Yeah, I think especially hanging on to your ideas a lot. Finding that something doesn't work, but trying really to will it to work, to try to force a square peg in a round hole. Again, I think it's very tempting, and I think when I say this as a generic platitude, everyone goes, "Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely, you want to analyze your ideas, and you want to, the classic kind of morbid analogy is you want to be able to kill your babies." And it really feels that way sometimes. I mean, some of the stuff you've spent months and months doing, or you've had this design idea for a decade, and you think, "Oh man, if only I had the opportunity to implement it." And you go and do it, and you realize that there's a fatal flaw with it, and it just doesn't work. And understanding that and understanding when to, pull the ripcord on the idea and move on to something else, I think is very important. And not having the clarity to do that is what burns, I think, most game developers in the end.
It sounds like it's kind of getting back again to this idea of iterating, um, which it does seem like it's something that's important as any kind of developer. Um, so I guess, do you have any advice on how people who are just coming to development can sort of develop this ability to iterate and not to hang on to um, things that are not going to work?
Yeah, so I should mention, because we talked a little bit about different levels of game developers. I think ground zero game developers, you're just learning skill sets, right? You're learning how to mix your mortar. You're learning how a brick lays on top of another brick and just trying to build like a wall in your backyard and not really worrying about, is this wall useful for anyone? Does this wall look nice? You just want it to be a wall and you want it to stand up because damn it, it needs to do it. I think when we talk about game design, we're one step removed from those basic skill sets. I think that's kind of the next level that you're taking, and I think when you're at that level, what's really important is, again, not being precious about the skills that you have developed. Because again, damn it, it took me so long to understand how to build this wall. So now I've built the same wall and it's super long. And somebody says, hey, you know what? It'd be great if this wall, instead of all red bricks, used yellow bricks. You go, man, I've only ever worked with red bricks. I don't get it. This is stupid. And you want to hold on to that idea. And the concept of letting that go can be really tricky when you're building skill sets. I don't have, I wish there was a great holistic way that works for everybody to do it. I think it's very personal for you. But I think that end goal of being able to take a step back is really what levels you up from kind of an aspiring game developer to somebody who can actually make something fun, even if it's small. Somebody who can actually take something from a concept, an idea in your head, to something that others would play and others would have fun with.
Yeah, I I often recommend to people as probably the what I consider the number one most important thing to do when you're trying to get into like a field of coding is to like connect and stay connected to some sort of community, because like there's so much failure involved in like learning to what doesn't work, and like finding your way to that iterative process, that I think it helps to have that like backup and connection to other people who are doing that to like continue to make it real.
Yeah, I think the strategy that works a lot for me is being proud of taking the time and genuinely spending the effort to do something. And that's in game development, or that's like learning ukulele or something. I'm terrible at music. I've never done music in my entire life, and I know that going into learning ukulele, and just spending 30 minutes every day just doing it. And if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, I don't get upset about it because I spent the 30 minutes doing it. I'm there. I'm present. I'm doing it, and that's enough. That's enough to make me happy. That mentality has helped me throughout my life in like a number of different ways, and it works for me. So hopefully, if that strategy works for somebody else, that's great. But I think it is very personal for what works for you. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I think I was inspired by because personally I've had to like adopt some form of successful mentality to like maintain consistent effort.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that was inspiring to me was this documentary about one of the Star Wars stop motion animators, like, and just like they were sort of talking about how, when he was like a kid, he was just putting in all these hours to do, stop motion animations in his room or whatever, and nobody would ever look at. or anything. And I think that there's a level of disconnection with the process there that's like really useful. Um, I think this leads me to another question. Let me find this. Yeah. So this question here, and it kind of has to do with the world that we find ourselves in. And I think this is going to continue to be especially more relevant to people who are coming up now. So how can we help ourselves get in touch with the tedious and time-consuming creation process in an age of instant gratification?
That's tricky. Again, I think that's personal. I don't know if I can answer that for
Yeah.
everyone. I think the light at the end of the tunnel for me always, because it is hard and it can be, it's time consuming, and sometimes you don't have something you can show to anybody for a long time. Um, I think the thrill of watching somebody play your game and have a good time, like have genuine fun, see a smile on their face because of something that you made, is it's I've never done crack cocaine, but I assume it's a similar feeling. It's just addictive. It's when somebody asks me why do you make games, I think that's a big part of it. It's being able to find fun and let other people find that fun too. Of like making joy for someone is brilliant. It's fantastic. I'm really into it. I really love it. That's I think what ultimately drives me forward in this industry in particular. Because again, I could pick up ukulele and learn it, but I don't really want to be in a band playing ukulele. Like why do I make games? I think for me in particular, what drives me forward is that feeling that I get every time I see someone, even if it's just one person, just that joyous, uncontrollable smile on someone's face when they're having a good time is great. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Uh, okay. Let me see if I have other questions here. Okay, I guess I'll go with this one. This is sort of a cross between your experience as a teaching game development and as a developer. Do you feel that teaching others makes you a better game developer in any way?
Yeah, I think teaching somebody a skill makes you better at that skill no matter what it is. I think it was Einstein that said, if you can't teach it, you don't know it. And I think that's really prescient. I mean, obviously, I can't teach you in the next 30 minutes how to make ray traced volumetric clouds, but I can hopefully get you there if I had to over the course of 5 years, from like learning how to code to then learning what a shader is to then learning what ray trace, like all of these different steps. And I think if you can't if you don't know it well enough to teach it, then you can't really experiment in ways to remix it and change it. I think you're following along pretty well, but until you get to that level of expertise where you can tell somebody else how to do it, you're not an expert at it. And so yeah, so I think teaching for me helps me understand what it is that I know, and honestly what it is that I don't know. I tell my students every single, like the start of every single quarter, I hope that at some point somebody asks me a question and my genuine answer will be, I don't know. Because that is the growth in myself. That's like, because if I don't know, I'll go find out for you. But I'm curious, like what are the holes that I have? What can't I fill in on my own? And I'll go learn that and come back to you. And but that's really what makes teaching fun for me, is finding those little holes that I still have, that everybody has, and sort of filling those in different ways.
Yeah, that's definitely valuable to start to learn what you don't know. That's reminds me of uh, what is it? It's like a forgetting what the field of psychology was that it was in, but they were what is it, like people who don't know things aren't aware that they don't know them, and that means that like lack of competency tends to correlate with ignorance.
Right.
It's just
I forget. There's
yeah,
some type of curve that's, on one axis is the amount that you know, and on the other, on like the x-axis is the amount that you know, and on the y-axis is the amount that you think you know, and it sort of
right, yeah,
spikes up like right at the beginning. Oh, you know very little, but you think you know a lot, and then comes cratering way back down as soon as you get a bit more into it, and then obviously like slowly goes up, and to the point where like, yeah, you probably will end up knowing as much as you think you do. But that's the typical sort of undergrad to grad student mentality of, oh, you think you know everything and you realize you know nothing.
right. Yeah, I'm always um, bringing up the Dunning Kruger curve
I think that's it.
of
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's the one that I'm thinking of.
good old Mount Stupid. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, due to my experience of like moderating a coding community that's pretty focused on like raw beginners,
hmm
I see like a lot of people have that tendency to like get into the introduction
hmm
area to a subject and everything goes so smooth because it's all so like black and white and
hmm
it's laid out really simple, so there's this sense of making like rapid progress, and then once you get past that you start like becoming aware of how much you don't know
hmm
at a like faster rate than you're actually learning things, so it feels like you're going backwards.
hmm
So it's just it's easy for people to give up in that space. Anyway, I've like, oh, this is a Q&A, and that's not a question. uh let me see if I have any more questions. I think that we're doing we've we're coming along in terms of time, and I asked a lot of my questions. um oh, okay, well, this one's decent. So how do you avoid burnout? What do you do when you need to step away from the work to renew or reinvigorate your creative energy, or is that an issue for you?
Yeah, I think more people should talk about it because I think it's an issue for everyone. I think people see these auteurs on the internet or on TV or wherever and think, oh, this person is 100% passionate the entire time that they're working on something. It's not true. It can't be true for anybody. Of course, not talking about industry burnout in the sense of overwork, but just talking about, mental design burnout, the idea of, hey, I've worked on this game for 3 years now. It's finally released. I need a break. Like everybody needs a break, of course, absolutely. And so I think recognizing that and understanding that, hey, just because you need a break from something, it doesn't mean that it's not for you. It just means that you might need to step away. There are different levels of that too. I think there is that 3 year, end of project kind of cratering that I talked about. There's also just day to day understanding your own self and your own body and what you need, especially in the time of work from home, or if you're doing, game development as a hobby. It's really easy to get very passionate and work crazy hours to just push yourself, but then you end up again falling down to earth really hard. And we're not robots. We can't work 20 hours a day. We can't work 100 hours a week. It just doesn't happen for people. It's impossible. And so understanding yourself and your own boundaries and what works well for you. For example, if I have an entire day without meetings where I'm not talking to anybody basically the whole time, I found that my ideal workday is somewhere around 5 to 6 hours. It's usually close to 6 hours. And after that, it's just too much. It's just too long. I love video games. I've been making games since I was a little kid, and I know I've wanted to do this since I was 11. And yet, I can't do it that long. I can't do it every day. It's just taxing. It's taxing on your brain in a variety of ways. And you just kind of need to get outside, go for a walk, have a coffee, do something else. And I think, especially in Western culture, we don't talk about that often enough. In North America, we think go go go. The more you can do, the better you are. But a lot of studies, especially, there's a lot of studies coming out of Europe, especially Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Finland, where they've talked about the 30-hour work week, or they've talked about the 25-hour work week, and how people are more efficient at doing their job. And it's not just an efficiency for the sake of your mental health, it's also an efficiency for the sake of the project. And I think for me, that's where I really understood it the best, was when I looked at what I was doing and I went, if my goal is to make the best game possible, then I need to stop working right now, because I'm making worse decisions that then put us further behind by overworking myself and thinking that I can do something that I can't. And I think that's really when I started to understand the value of stepping away from something. There's this thing that all of us have where we're stuck on a problem. We don't know the solution. We're hitting our head against a wall and we can't do it. And you can think about that even when you play a game, when you're playing a game and you can't beat a boss and you can't do it. And then you go to sleep, you wake up in the morning and you beat it on the first try. And that's your brain taking time to process it. It needs a break in order to understand how to piece things back together. And so I think for me, that's vital. And I will beat that drum for as long and as loud as I can, because I think it will make us happier as a society, and honestly, have us making better products and living with better things around us, more and more.
Yeah, I tell people that all the time, like in my role as a moderator, because people are they'll ask, I'm having trouble solving this problem. What do I do? And like I basically most of the time I'll just tell them to sleep on it,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what we do in our subconscious when we sleep, is our brains are like programmed to try to solve problems that
Mm-hmm.
we've been working on. So like even if you're not aware of it and you forget it, like once you wake up in the morning, like your brain has been processing all that stuff and you're refreshed by sleep, and you're going to be so much better prepared to like deal with it than if you'd have tried to stay up all night and like force your way through it. So it's a I definitely agree. It's interesting, like the self-management aspect that comes into it. Definitely, even as just making your own stuff. I all right. Let me see if I have. Oh, okay. Well, this is going to be, maybe it's too specific of a question, but we'll see. So, um, okay. So, have you heard of the concept of habitual time blocking? Uh,
Not by that term. No, I don't recognize
okay.
it.
So, I was gonna reference this concept because it's kind of going back to motivation. You know what? I think I'll probably skip that. Let's see. I'm about out of questions. These were um yeah. I think that'll probably cover it because I had a couple more questions, but I thought they were a little bit generic, so there wasn't like a really great reason to ask them to you specifically. Uh, so it looks like we've got one question from our audience. If you want to address this, so they asked, what got you into game development and what made you stick with it?
Yeah, so part of that I think I answered earlier, what makes me stick with game development is that joy that I see from people playing my games. That's unmatchable. I have yet to find any experience in life, whether natural or synthetic, that gets me that same level of joy. I'm really into that. I think what got me into it is a lot of it's kind of a boring answer. I think it's what gets a lot of people into it. I played a lot of video games and I liked playing them. And I thought it was fun. I remember my when I was 11 years old, I got a magazine that talked about a conference called E3, which is this giant conference that happens every year in Los Angeles where people show off the new games. And I remember flipping through it and thinking, wait, people are paid to make video games? This is amazing. How have I not thought of this? That's what I want to do. And I never look back. That's always what I wanted to do. That's always what I wanted to be. And I'm happy because I don't know if I have the skill sets to do anything else. I've always thought about that. Hey, if this goes belly up, can I get some programming job doing something else? And I think the answer is no. I don't know if I know enough SQL or Ruby on Rails or CSS or whatever to be able to, make a full stack web developed JavaScript thingy. Um, I can make you a cool looking model and make it animate and move and stuff. But yeah, it's been a while that I've been in this industry, and I think I just really like it. And I'm happy that I can be passionate about what I do.
That's fantastic. I think that's a great place to be. Um, well, I guess that pretty much wraps up our Q&A then. Um, oh, looks like we may have got another question. Oh, okay. So Joshua Favre was saying thank you, and I also thank you for joining us for this Q&A. Thank you very much.
For sure, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Great. So have a great rest of your day. And we'll just sign off here.
Perfect. Thanks.